context needs to be sharpened. EU capital markets and the financial system play a key role in this process and need to remain a resilient enabler of capital for investments and a trusted destination for savers and investors. More than ever, the Capital Markets Union and Banking Union are instrumental for long-term prosperity in our region. CFA Society in Portugal, whose members are finance professionals that earn the Chartered Financial Analyst certification, is playing an active role in championing ethics in our industry and ESG, environmental, social and governance criteria in investments. These are distinctive elements that will make a major difference in the forthcoming future, and we are promoting actively in Portugal. Let all of us that work in this sector measure up and rise to the challenge of the troubled times we are living in. Before I turn over to our distinguished keynote speaker, I would like to deeply thank all our guest speakers today. It is a great honor to have you here with us. I would like to remind you that at the end of this session, we will be awarding our second edition of the CFA Portugal Ethics and Excellence in Financial Journalism. Just a quick remark to say that the press was invited to be present in this webinar, and that this session is being recorded and all materials will be made available to access after the event. It is my pleasure now to introduce and turn over to His Excellency, the Secretary of State for Finance, Mr. João Nuno Mendes.
So thank you very much for the invitation by the CFA Institute and the CFA Society Portugal. It's an honor to be here with you. I would also like to give my compliments to the other speakers. I'm seeing Professor Vitor Constâncio, as well as the other the regulators and the heads of the regulators here in Portugal. So I have a presentation that I think that we shared with you. I don't know if you could share the presentation, because then I would do it slide by slide. Is that possible? Thank you. So next slide, please. So the Portuguese presidency has a number of action lines related to resilience, green, digital, social, and global. So fostering the recovery, it's absolutely critical at the moment. So we are going through a tremendous crisis, and of course all the institutions proved capable of coordinating their action, but there are still a number of very big challenges that lie ahead of us. So in terms of the environmental compromise, promoting the EU as a leader in climate action, so that's going to be critical for us to have to incorporate that the European Green Deal in our competitiveness model, to accelerate also the digital transformation at the service of citizens and businesses, and at the social level to enhance and strengthen the European social model, and finally to promote a Europe that is open to the world. So these are the main action lines. They are global action lines. We'll go through the action lines more related to the economic and financial affairs. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh yes, I'm sorry. So recovering the economy. So the regulation that will allow the member states to submit their recovery plans is expected to enter into force by February. And so we hope that by February, March, and April, we'll have most of the recovery plans submitted to formally. So we think that we're going to dedicate a lot of our effort during the Portuguese presidency to get those plans moving ahead in the approval pipeline. So it takes approximately 3 months for them to be approved. It's 2 months for the assessment by the Commission, and there's 1 month then for them to be approved in the ECOFIN. So we hope that the Portuguese presidency will be capable of, to have a leadership in this acceleration of the effort to approve the recovery plans. Then we have the strengthening of the economic and monetary union, and then we need to address a number of emerging challenges, many related to the impact of the twin transitions in the financial sector, so the digital and the green transitions. So next slide, please. So relaunch the economy and implement the recovery plan. So of course, I already mentioned the approval of the recovery plans as one of our main priorities. We must be aware that the multi-annual financial framework plus the Next Generation EU represent around 1.8 trillion for the next 7 years. So we think that we have the means available for us to deliver now that the economy is in the need of this financial effort. Of course, we will need to be capable to react to the way this crisis will unfold in new chapters during the coming months. So this is why we have this point follow-up of crisis response. Then we have a point related to NPLs and financial stability. So it will be very important to monitor all developments as regards financial stability. We have a number of moratoria in place all over Europe, and their phasing out is not synchronized. So we'll see the different moratorias expiring at different moments in time. We have an extraordinary level of support to the economies through, the public guarantees of loans. It's quite an important exposure for states, but it will also, let us say, contribute to decrease the impact of the transmission from the non-financial to the financial sector of this crisis. So we'll have to deal also with the prospect of an increasing number of insolvencies, and we also need to react to this impact, which is not the same in all sectors. So we see that the impact is very important in a number of sectors. So we have been seeing the service sector particularly impacted, mainly the tourism, everything that's related to travel. And then we see that resilience, for example, in the industrial sector in a number of economies. So we would like also to resume the discussion on the fiscal rules related to the medium term. Of course, we need to be very careful about the timing of such discussions, since our focus now is to react, is to face, it's to tackle, the crisis. But anyhow, maybe that will be the opportunity in the second quarter to resume this discussion. So next slide, please. So one, as regards the strengthening of the economic and monetary union, so we have one topic, which is the advance of the discussions of the banking union. So there is a consensus that it would be important to progress in the banking union, since there was an important achievement by the end of 2020, which was the approval of the reform of the SM Treaty and anticipation of the common backstop implementation. That decision was taken in the Eurogroup. So we think there's a momentum, let us say there's a motivation for different member states to try to progress in the discussions on the banking union. But we feel that it's very important to get some progress in the different dimensions, because there is a very strong position by an important number of states, an important number of member states, that we need to advance in several work streams and not only in one work stream in order to produce significant results. Advance the discussions on the capital union, so on the capital markets union. So we feel that it would be very important to get a very also positive reaction of the financial markets, such as the one that we had until now, because of all the coordination effort that we had in the European Union. So it would be important to advance in not only in the banking union, but only in the capital markets union. So there's an action plan which was presented by the European Commission. So we hope to advance also on this file. There's one very interesting element which has to do with the creation of a single access point with information, financial and non-financial information of the European Union companies. We think that would be interesting in order to, to foster the development of the capital markets. And there are also some elements which are related to the discussion of the capital requirements directive and regulation, as for example, the prudential treatment of the SME equity investments by bank and insurance companies. So the preventing of money laundering will also be an objective of the efforts that we'll be pursuing. So next slide, please. So other priorities which are related to the digital and green transitions, advanced discussions on the digital package. So there is a number of initiatives that may be that may be concluded during the Portuguese presidency, such as MiCA, which means markets in crypto assets. So a number of concerns has been expressed as regards the development of crypto assets, as regards the designated stable coins, as the need to regulate the creation and operation of these crypto assets, with the objective also of consumer protection, and also to protect the monetary sovereignty of the European of the euro. So it will be also an opportunity to advance the discussions on sustainable finance strategy. So we need to be aware that the European Green Deal will involve the need to invest hundreds of billions of euros, and there is tremendous interest of the financial markets in all the instruments that have a sustainable label. So we think that this will be an opportunity to create an infrastructure to mobilize funds for the execution of the European Green Deal. Then there will be the opportunity to start a discussion on the introduction of the new own resources. So we hope that this discussion will be started by the second quarter of this year. So a number of options has been already discussed, like the carbon taxes, which are related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We are talking about also emission taxes, digital taxes, plastic taxes. So a number of options have been already presented and discussed, but we think that it will be very important. The Commission's proposal that as I mentioned before, will be presented by the second quarter of this year. It will be also important to continue to work on the tax challenges related to the digitalization of the economy. So this is the discussion that is taking place at the G20 and the OECD level. There is a very strong political pressure on the European Union to move ahead, but of course this change in the American administration is a very important opportunity to build a bridge in this transatlantic cooperation. Then we have the strengthening of the administrative cooperation in areas related to the tax fraud and also to fight tax evasion. Then the follow-up on the customs union window will also be one of the files that we intend to move ahead. So next slide, please. So these are the main priorities. Let me tell you that we will have a number of online talks that will be held during this this first half of the year, which are related to these main priorities, and we'll have their special guests, academia, we'll have the European Commission, and to get also the stakeholders of all these areas involved in such public discussion. At the end of the Portuguese presidency, we'll have what we call the Recovery Summit, that we really hope it is a moment for the EU to present all the achievements and the execution that it was possible to deliver to fight against this crisis in the different areas, and we hope to have a very important number of plans, recovery plans, as I already mentioned before, approved, and we hope that the economic recovery will be definitely in place at the time. So I'll be glad to, to discuss any points or to answer any questions that you would like to raise or contributions that you would like to mention for the Portuguese presidency. Thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary of State. Thank you for your vision. And I think it will be a wonderful way of starting the discussions. And so, with no further ado, I would progress to the first panel of discussion. It will be moderated by Raul Marques. And Raul, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Marcos. To begin with, good afternoon to you all. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I would like to begin welcoming the quite wide audience that we now have with us, really a very high number of people attending. As you know, we will begin with the first panel. The topic for this panel is ensuring financial stability in COVID-19 times. What is the role of regulators to address the threats to the stability of the EU banking system? For that purpose, we have a panel of three high-level experts that will be acting as speakers. I will present them in a moment as they have the floor. Just to let you know, to let the audience know that the format is as follows. We'll have short presentations of 10-minute presentations, around 10 minutes for each of the three speakers. Afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion followed by a Q&A coming from the audience. So for that, I would please ask that people put their questions through the Q&A window at the site. It's quite likely that we won't have time to all the questions, given all the people that is attending. And therefore, I would like to please ask you all to keep remarks and the questions as short as possible. So let's get started. I will I'll pass the floor to Dr. Mário Centeno. The three speakers really almost don't need to be presented. Anyway, Dr. Mário Centeno is, as we all know, currently the governor of Banco de Portugal. Previously, he was appointed as governor of Banco de Portugal last year in July 2020. Previously, he served as president of the Eurogroup, elected for that purpose in 2017. He was also in that period the chair of the board of governors of the European Stability Mechanism during the same period from 2017 to July 2020. And he was also the Minister of Finance for Portugal for more than 4 years, beginning late 2015. So please, I will ask Dr. Mário Centeno to get the floor. Thank you.
You have to unmute. You have to unmute the mic.
It's not unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe now.
Now, yes.
Okay, sorry. There are two buttons to press in this micro. It's a double filter. So good afternoon, and thank you for the kind invitation to speak about the financial stability challenges faced by European regulators in the context of this pandemic crisis. Well, we said that many times. This crisis was not originated in Europe, but unfortunately it spread throughout the world, including, of course, Europe. The pandemic crisis is unique and exogenous in economic terms. It raises many questions for the future of Europe, not least about the financial stability of the European Union banking system. There's one thing, in any case, that we are fortunate this time around. Financial stability is only an issue because of the prominent role that the banking system played in stopping the liquidity crisis that was ensuing at the end of the first quarter of 2020. Contrary to previous crises, this is not a structural one, requiring from policymakers and regulators a different set of policies. In Europe, the response to the pandemic was unprecedented and coordinated, which was also unprecedented. And these are the good news for the post-COVID recovery. However, the scars of the pandemic crisis, which will differ across countries, will pose challenges. One size will not, actually, it maybe never does, fit all. Unlike in previous crises, the monetary and budgetary policies adopted by member states and in Europe throughout 2020 are complementing each other. The policy response prevented a lengthy and catastrophic crash, which could have led to substantial job losses and widening inequality, risking the cohesion and convergence efforts among member states. All decision makers in each and every area and jurisdiction have been swift, innovative, and let me stress this again, coordinated. This was exactly what finance ministers, for example, did in the Eurogroup in early April 2020. And let me quote the press note from that meeting because it actually set the stage for what came next. Subject to guidance from leaders, discussions on the legal and practical aspects of a fund, including its relation to the EU budget, its sources of financing, and on innovative financial instruments consistent with the EU treaties. This was what was asked for the European Union to put together. So following the decisions by finance ministers, the European Council agreed on the next generation EU stimulus package. It comprises 750 billion euros in grants and loans financed by common European debt with issuances expected to have maturities up to 30 years. This is indeed a leap in the European political landscape, one waited for so long. And so far, financial markers are tuned. They showed a tremendous appetite for EU-issued debt. It is not difficult to expect that policies in Europe will not be the same after these years. The bank's response to the pandemic crisis has also been fast, large, and broad. The ECB acted strongly immediately in March and has been adapting and reinforcing its instruments as needed. The PEP was created in March with flexible purchasing criteria and currently has a size of 1.85 trillion euros. The is reinforcing 120 euros. There was also easing of conditions to access the LTROs and for eligible backdraft. All this describes the response of central banks that went beyond conventional monetary policy. Authorities have facilitated the continued provision of credit. Euro area banks were allowed to operate temporarily below the level of capital defined by Pillar 2 guidance and offer requirements, without facing corrective actions from supervisors. This corresponds to a leeway of approximately 140 billion euros, which can be used to absorb losses or potentially finance up to 2 trillion euros of lending in the euro area alone. But to preserve the bank's own resources and to balance the effort among public and private parts, the ECB advised banks to be prudent, with dividend payments and share buyback schemes. It also advised banks regarding their remuneration policies. There is evidence that central bank actions have been crucial to avoid market fragmentation and a more pronounced economic crisis. They preserved favorable financing conditions across all sectors. It is quite important to stress this, all sectors, amid a strong asymmetry of the impact of the crisis. Also, the spike in euro area sovereign bond yields was reversed after the central bank's intervention. Yields now stand at historically low nominal levels. For example, Portugal's 10-year yields are now negative. But calming the sovereign debt markets also brought reassurance to other markets. Looking ahead in 2021, to pave the way for recovery, the measures must be adapted to the evolution of the crisis. It is quite important to be adaptive at this point in time. In the same terms, we must recognize the individual limits of fiscal, monetary, and micro and macro prudential policies. Therefore, we must take advantage of all synergies of an harmonized and coordinated action. The COVID-19 shock is likely to accelerate some of the trends that were already underway before the crisis. The Secretary of State just mentioned them: digitalization, crisis management, and resolution frameworks reinforcement. Adaptation is the challenge that governments and other policymakers are going to face next months. The recovery of the economy is asymmetry among sectors and firms, but also require wise exit strategies from today's policies. And this is quite important to keep financial stability altogether. European policy must recognize these differences and devise policies that sustain healthy recovery. Withdrawing benefits all at once or at the same pace for all firms and individuals will be a mistake. This fiscal policy as an advantage over monetary policy. Fiscal policy can target specific agents, while monetary policy is broad-based in nature, so they must indeed cooperate. From the central bank perspective, we are working to make sure that the financial system is part of the solution and not part of the problem on the post-COVID recovery. As such, ensuring the smooth transmission of the monetary policy is key. Making sure that the risks assumed today are being properly managed is crucial and part of our priorities. At a larger scale, as referred by our Secretary of State for Finance, I'd like to finish my intervention by placing, now in a different vest, a strong emphasis on the importance of achieving a complete banking union. It is in moments of uncertainty that decision makers should provide clarity about the way forward, and this is quite an important issue for all of us, for financial stability in Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mário Centeno. I will now pass the floor to Dr. Vítor Constâncio. He's a former Vice President of the European Central Bank. He acted as such as Vice President of the ECB for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. Previously, in the Portuguese government, he was Secretary of State for the Budget and Planning in 74-76 period, and also afterwards Finance Minister in 77-78. At the Central Bank of Portugal, he was Director of the Economics Department, Deputy Governor, and then from 2000 to 2010, Governor of the Banco de Portugal, and consequently a member of the European Central Bank Governing Council. So I now have the pleasure to pass the floor to Dr. Vítor Constâncio.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I will now present some slides. I hope you are showing okay. So our panel is about what are the threats to the stability of the EU banking system. And in his outline, I list potential sources of future instability because so far, many of the measures that were taken to mitigate the effect of a big recession on banking have provided a situation which has been hiding potential problems for the future when those support will end, like moratoria, public loan guarantees, forbearance, and all of that. Because then may come the point where low profitability, capital needs to absorb the full recognition of loan losses that have been postponed, all that can put pressure on capital ratios of banks. So I will discuss briefly the prospects for profitability, the question of the full recognition of induced losses. There is big uncertainty about the size of those losses that may come, and certainly the impact will be heterogeneous, meaning that some countries will be more affected than others. And finally, if that emerges in a significant way, then what should be done? Thinking about the main risk, which is that the banks may respond to pressure on capital ratios by deleveraging. And if that happens, that would be a restriction of credit supply that would undermine the recovery. So this is really the tail risk that is present, because no one is predicting that out of this late recognition of losses will come a situation of a general banking crisis like in 2008. It's totally different now, but a significant number of banks in several countries may be affected. Looking to profitability, it has been decreasing, of course. The EBA recent dashboard explains how profits have increased a little bit in the third quarter of last year, coming from 0.4 ROE in the first half to 2%, including the third quarter. But the improvement was mainly due to lower impairments, which is strange in a big recession, and trading profits. But I want to highlight the point of the right-hand side chart that shows that substantial growth of credit volumes during the 3 quarters of last year were not enough to offset the margins decrease, and consequently net interest income on average declined during those 3 quarters. The problem is that the increase in volumes of 2020 will not be repeated, of course, this year and the next. There will be a deceleration, quite a deceleration of credit growth in this year and next. It shows here that from April to October of last year, significant increases of credit were due to the guaranteed loans part that you see here in what regards these 4 countries in the brown bars, whereas the total net lending to non-financial corporations was much lower than that. And of course, guaranteed loans are going to end during this year, which means that then credit will not grow in the same way. And another element that will contribute to the same result is, of course, that the need of firms for precautionary liquidity when the crisis came, that will be much lower going forward now. That won't be repeated. And initially, the credit risk is expected to increase sharply. As indicated in this chart, and all my charts are from the latest ECB financial stability review. The chart on the right indicates that the forecast of non-financial corporations insolvencies for 2020 and 2021 increases by 30%, 40%, very high numbers indeed, so much that the FSR states that corporate vulnerabilities may rise further to reach levels observed during the global financial crisis. And it was to be expected, of course, as a result of a big recession, but at the same time as a big increase in credit, that the credit risk involved in such an increase of the stock of credit will materialize. Then this should lead, of course, to higher impairment costs, meaning higher provisions. But what we see so far is really not that yet in Europe. In the left-hand chart, there is a comparison between what has been the development of provisions in banking and what is the model forecast of what those provisions should be in view of the recession, which is shown in the yellow line. And the same message comes from the comparison between the growth of provisions in Europe, the blue line on the right, and in the US, both in percentage of total loans. And we see that Europe lags behind what the American banks have already done. So we can expect then that higher NPLs and increased provisioning will come this year and in next year, which will affect, of course, profitability and capital. To sum up the prospects for profitability, they don't seem to be very encouraging because of deceleration of credit growth, the same interest margins, the increased provisions, and very likely lower trading profits, as the financial markets cannot continue to provide forever the sort of returns that they have provided until now. And from the point of view of regulators, the only thing that could improve these prospects would be if the ECB would improve the TLTROs by increasing the tiering multiplier. But the big question may come or not, again, it's all very uncertain, if down the road several banks will have pressure on capital ratios that would decrease as a result of these developments. And then what will happen? Will increases in capital ratios be possible, or banks will be then led to deleverage in order to increase the capital ratio? And that's the big risk, of course, if they go for the second alternative. And as usual in such situations, there are tensions between micro supervision, which wants always more and more capital, and financial stability considerations. Not fortunately, that didn't happen last year because the supervision in Europe responded well by granting some capital relief, but we don't know what will happen down the road. And I know I've heard many micro supervisors over the years saying that they don't care too much about financial stability and that their role is necessarily pro-cyclical. So we will see what will happen, but what are then the solutions if that pressure on capital ratios will materialize in a significant number of banks? Again, we don't know, and it's hardly possible to have some very reliable forecasts about that. But what are then the solutions? One is to raise capital. Now, all solutions, as I say there in the slide, all solutions face problems. The first is for banks to raise capital in the market. But that, of course, confronts the difficulties coming from a very high cost of equity right now, profitability prospects, and limited dividend distribution, which, of course, again, impacts the attractiveness of investors to buy bank shares. Second response would be then the banks to embark into balance sheet deleveraging in order to keep or increase their capital ratios and satisfy the demands of the regulation and supervisors. That implies, of course, as I already mentioned, the big risk of credit supply restrictions, which would undermine the recovery if they would happen. Third solution would be more regulatory temporary capital relief, again, as it was done last year, perhaps going for a wider possible use of the different capital buffers that exist in the system. But this, of course, faces the problem of market pressures. Most banks have not taken advantage of the supervisory regulatory capital relief that was granted. We don't know why, but certainly some may be afraid that if they allow their capital ratios to come down, they would face higher funding costs in the market. And so they have not used what has been offered by the supervisors. And that may happen again. We don't know. And finally, as a last resort, if nothing of the above would work, then as a last resort would be public capital injections, direct or indirect, to support asset management companies in order to deal with NPLs that will increase and need to be dealt with. But that, of course, both things would require the BRRD adjustment or suspension during a period of time in order to be possible. So again, facing a big difficulty. So it seems that if these pressures and the later recognition of NPLs and losses will come in a significant way, then there is a problem, and several approaches will be necessary, and certainly the regulators must be prepared to do whatever is necessary in order to avoid the credit crunch in late 21 and in 22. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vítor Constâncio. We are almost on schedule, so I'll pass right away to Dr. Luís Moraes. Dr. Luís Moraes is the chair of CIR-SF, Centro de Investigação sobre Regulação e Supervisão Financeira. He's a full professor at Lisbon Law University, Jean Monnet Chair in EU Economic Regulation, and he is also currently the Vice Chair of the Appeal Panel of the Single Resolution Board and Chair of the Supervisory Council of the Portuguese Insurance and Pension Funds Supervisory Authority. He is the founder and chairman of CIR-SF. So, Mr. Luís Moraes, Dr. Luís Moraes, please have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It is a pleasure to participate in this seminar, and I thank TFA for the invitation. I would say that my task in this initial statement is at the same time easy and difficult, because with the privilege of sharing the panel with two most distinct macroeconomists, both of whom I salute with the greatest admiration, I shall play here a little bit the role of the boring lawyer, emphasizing some key legal challenges in terms of safeguarding financial stability in these very trying COVID times, although of course discussing it inevitably also from an economic standpoint. In fact, a decade after the great financial crisis, we are facing a dramatic crisis which has unexpectedly erupted. This crisis bears in common with the previous one a daunting perspective of systemic risk and of destruction of wealth and employment. But conversely, to my mind, it has a distinctive feature concerning the level of uncertainty, and I would dare say the extreme technical difficulty in producing reliable projections. And I will come to this in a minute. I can anticipate that at the current crossroads, I would purport to address, or at least highlight, given the time constraints, 4 core topics, trying not to overlap with the other speakers. First, how to progress legally and economically in the treatment of NPLs of the banking sector, which has already been addressed by Dr. Vítor Constâncio, NPLs which may threaten any perspectives of economic recovery that will require precisely a continued expansion of credit. Second, how to enhance, and I would say swiftly rather than slowly, the framework for bank crisis management, a framework that the European Union has put in place after the last crisis, but which is still incomplete. Third, taking a more, I would say, holistic view, and considering that the financial sector oversight involves a number of different public policy functions, I think it is relevant to discuss, based on the experience with COVID policy responses, what are the best arrangements for the design of institutional framework and mandates of various agencies in light of the interplay, but sometimes also contradictions, between monetary policy functions and responsibilities of financial stability and microprudential supervision, macroprudential supervision, and conduct of business supervision. Dr. Vítor Constâncio has approached a little bit this point. And fourth, in the context of a third pandemic wave, I would touch the extreme need of fiscal instruments to complete the monetary policy toolbox. I will probably skip this point on account of time. But let me start with my initial point about the distinctive feature of this crisis concerning the level of uncertainty it involves and the extreme technical difficulties in producing reliable projections. Well, to my mind, such difficulty entails in itself a negative spillover effect in terms of the overall confidence, which in turn is bound to have significant repercussions in the banking sector. Banking sector whose activities are basically fueled by the levels of confidence of the stakeholders. So we have here a critical point. We only need to compare the September ECB staff macroeconomic projections with the December projections to fully ascertain the difficulty in producing solid estimates. And quite exceptionally, I would quote from these December projections a short passage concerning its key assumptions. Quote, the baseline assumes that the stringency of containment measures in the euro area in the fourth quarter of 2020 will on average be maintained in the first quarter of 2021, end of quote. So I need not add how much this assumption is critical and debatable in the current context of drastic reinforcement of containment measures in January 2021, given the prevailing pandemic context. Another distinctive factor is that the current crisis, involving a combined demand side and supply side shocks, is a paradigmatic illustration of systemic risks working powerfully outside the banking sector, to which, regrettably, very little attention has been paid over the past decade. As Dr. Vítor Constâncio has put it, well, the risk of an amplification of these endogenous risks to a risk within the financial sector is the banking sector is somehow reduced, but the risk exists. I would say that at this point, it is absolutely vital to prevent what I would call an endogenous risk amplification effect within the banking sector, which would have disastrous consequences. So in this critical context, I think it is fair to acknowledge that an extensive array of measures and actions has been developed in the European Union. Governor Centeno has touched that widely, building on a new European financial regulatory infrastructure, which was created in the previous crisis and partially corrected the gaps in financial integration that were a major imbalance of the Eurozone. Well, these measures adopted mainly between March and May 2020 have been widely commented, and I shall not dwell with them here. I would instead come back to conclude very, very briefly to my previous four core topics. On topic one, with the prospect at some point in the horizon of a way out strategy from payment holidays and public support schemes, and I'm considering here above all bank moratoria, I think that we shall almost inevitably have a new peak of NPLs. I shall not dwell here on specific numbers and on more severe ECB and EBA scenarios. And this will be combined, as Dr. Vítor Constâncio has stressed, with long-term profitability problems in the banking sector, which clearly have not encouraged NPL provisioning and an expedited recognition of NPL-related losses. So I would say that we need, as a matter of urgency, an efficient and functioning strategy to deal with the potential peak of COVID-related NPLs, which will differ from the legacy assets of the previous crisis. The good news here is that the Commission has just published a communication with its priorities to tackle NPLs, involving legislative and regulatory effort to expand as quickly as possible secondary distressed loan markets where banks can sell NPLs. The possible bad news is that we seem at this stage far from a deeper, wider discussion on and around a possible pan-European asset management company, more commonly referred as a European bad bank, somehow promoted by the chair of SSM, Andrea Enria, in comments in October in the Financial Times. On my second topic, and in a nutshell, due to time constraints, while we have had a giant progress, which was duly emphasized by Governor Centeno from the previous crisis on the European framework of bank crisis management, we still need, I would say, a much reinforced European approach to crisis management concerning medium-sized banks. And I would dare say an overall, significant overhaul of the prevailing approach and perhaps too rigid approach to state aid to banks. Still on the European banking crisis management framework, the recent Eurogroup agreement that the Secretary of State has mentioned on a common backstop to the Single Resolution Fund in the form of a credit line from the European Stability Mechanism to be introduced by the beginning of 2022, so 2 years ahead of the original schedule, is a positive development. But it would be important to at least somehow recover the idea of a new alternative plan for gradually building an European Deposit Insurance Scheme, EDIS, even in a less ambitious form. And here the fresh news from yesterday is that the president of the Eurogroup wants a precise EDIS timetable by next June, and this is a very much welcome development that I would particularly emphasize. I would entirely skip the topic on the urgent need of a European Union fiscal toolbox, and I will only add to conclude on my third topic, and ending therefore on a more holistic note, because I think that we should not lose sight in the midst of the fog of the crisis of a vision of more structural changes, that the current crisis highlights the need for rethinking on a qualitative basis a financial stability function, comprehending a new combination of both macroprudential and microprudential responsibilities in all subsectors of the financial system. This is a discussion that somehow Dr. Vítor Constâncio also introduced, and we may come back to that if we have time. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luís Moraes. Thank you to the three speakers, not only for the very good presentations, but also for being quite disciplined. And so we are almost on schedule. I would, given the fact that the Secretary of State for Finance, Dr. João Nuno Mendes, is still with us, we have received a question for him. Basically, the question is, bearing in mind the sort of comments that you have made in your presentation, would you like to share your thoughts with us regarding the plans that the Portuguese Treasury might have for the short term to issue a green/sustainable debt, so in the near future?
Yes, I must tell you that that's a file that we are currently studying at the moment. I cannot anticipate the timing, but that is something that which is of a very big interest for us. Of course, there are cost considerations that we need to take into account, but I would like to stress that under the agenda that I presented, it is anticipated that the Green Bond Standard can be presented by the Commission the second quarter of this year. And we must also, I would like to stress also that this sustainable finance trend is really mainstream now, as you can see, for example, in the Shore example. It's precisely through a financial instrument which are social bonds. So nobody would ever expect that we would have something like 90 billion in social bonds from one day to the other. So we think this is really a trend. Of course, the Portuguese Treasury would like to participate on it, but we are studying it, but I would not like to anticipate the timing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. Well, so now I would begin the panel discussion and begin. We've already received several questions that are being put by the audience. Well, we have several questions. Maybe I would begin by putting a question regarding the comments that you have all made regarding the stability of the banking system and the evolution of non-performing loans in the aftermath of the pandemic. So maybe, well, to you all, but maybe a bit more for Dr. Mário Centeno and Dr. Vítor Constâncio. What's your view on the Commission, the EU Commission has just presented a month ago the new action plan for NPLs. And do you think that the action plan, the road ahead that has been put forward will be sufficient to facilitate a post-COVID recovery, and namely to create a secondary market for NPLs? Anyway, feel free to develop issues that might have been put by each of the three speakers. But I would begin with this question, maybe Dr. Mário Centeno.
Okay, thank you, Raul, for the question. Let me say, to begin with, that the Commission communication goes indeed in the right direction. We need to understand, to create the mood to an European action, in any case, we must make sure that the typical moral hazard, structural discussion and debate that was the basis for our reaction to the crisis and solutions to the crisis 1 decade ago is not present and does not build in this occasion. And to do this, we all must act in a very coordinated way, and understanding what was the situation in which our banking and financial sector was at the beginning of this crisis, and that situation is quite different from the previous one. Let me put the numbers for Portugal, for example. The progress in the reduction of NPLs in the pre-crisis period was indeed remarkable. Since the second quarter of 2016 until the third quarter of 2020, banks decreased the volume of NPLs by 35 billion euros, which is less than 1/3 from the number existing in 2016. The ratio decreased from 17.9 to 5.3%. This is what describes the situation of banks before that. In Europe, we approved in 2017 an NPL action plan, and this plan was implemented, it was being implemented. All SSM banks were delivering in their own commitments with the SSM. So supervisors had also a key role in this process, and we must keep up with this momentum. The renewed impetus to finalize outstanding initiatives from this 2017 action plan for NPL secondary market is of great importance. A well-functioning secondary market is particularly relevant for banks to dispose of distressed assets. On this, I think the Portuguese presidency of the Council and the Secretary of State already stated that we'll work hard to reach an agreement between the Council and the European Parliament on the directive on credit services and credit purchasers. It will certainly do its best to achieve a swift agreement now that trilogues are about to start. This impetus from the European Commission is quite important. Unfortunately, even going in the right direction, the Commission statement does not include the possibility of establishing an European AMC, which may turn out to be probably too controversial and most probably not feasible in the coming discussions, but we should not lose sight of this discussion and remain positive. You know, we now face a much more coherent set to our debates. Brexit is, I mean, established its way. The US administration is now changing gears also in terms of policy and much more predictable, I suspect. Europe must play its part, do its homework and prepare all of us to the recovery, which is going to be strong, challenging, but we now have, as I mentioned, the last spring was quite difficult for everyone, but for Europe it was a leap of integration, quite important, that we must not lose sight of it and must not lose this momentum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if one of the other speakers wants to make a comment on this issue regarding NPLs. Dr. Vítor Constâncio has already raised several questions, interesting questions regarding these risks and the way it may affect the banking system. If not, I have yes.
I could perhaps step in, but without wanting to overlap on any comments on Dr. Vítor Constâncio. But just to
say something on the question. Yeah.
No, please, after you.
Please, Dr. Vítor Constâncio.
Okay. Very briefly then. Well, the Commission's communication is positive, but may not be enough. We don't know. Because when we look back to the remarkable reduction of NPLs in the European banks since the big financial crisis, what happened was an improvement of the situation, and the plan has been for the ECB supervision, the SSM, to put a lot of pressure on the banks to reduce the NPLs. Targets were defined, were followed, moral suasion, intense moral suasion was exerted, and that resulted because the situation in general had improved. So there was no help from European legislation or entities to behind the achievements that was indeed remarkable. We don't know this time if the same method can apply and work, but the president of the ECB supervision, Andrea Enria, has said recently, talked recently about the need for AMCs, and in particular the possibility of an European asset management company. Personally, I don't believe that that solution can be achieved, but what would be necessary would be a higher harmonization of rules by the Commission in what regards the functioning of AMCs in member countries, and in order to create network effects if the things are treated the same way in all member countries, which is not the case nowadays. And that would indeed be a measure to improve the secondary market, because so far, let's be candid, nothing really very useful was done in that respect from the European level. It came only from the national level. And finally, regarding AMCs, the only two AMCs that were very significantly successful in helping their banking sectors were the Irish one and the Spanish one. And both, not for nothing, both of course had the support of public capital behind it. Because the big problem of AMCs, there are several obstacles all the time. One of them is that the transfer price that the Commission imposes, of course, leads to levels that are much below the book level, which means that the banks have to recognize immediately huge losses. That's one point. And losses of the AMCs later on, and it was the case of Sareb during many years, have to be supported by the shareholders. And if the state is not there, it is difficult for the private banks to support a significant, big enough AMC. So that, of course, as I mentioned in my initial statement, is nowadays, after the Irish and Spanish case, after that, the BRRD has forbidden the participation of public capital in such companies, and that then is an obstacle to really turning AMCs as an important contributor, in my view, to the solution.
Thank you very much for your comment. Dr. Luís Moraes, do you want to comment?
Yes, very, very briefly, and speaking perhaps with academic freedom, I hope, I would really emphasize again this idea of the European bad bank or an European asset management company. But I'm aware that it is a very politically sensitive point. Clearly, we have opposing views, for instance, from the chair of SSM, Andrea Enria, and from the chair of the Single Resolution Board, Elke Koenig, which is very critical on this solution. But I think that we should not turn this into a semantic question, as sometimes it happens in the European debate. And Dr. Constancio, I think, has stricken the point, mentioning that perhaps pragmatically we may evolve towards a network effect, a network of national asset management companies that could have a role to support the economic recovery if these are appropriately designed. And I think that at least two elements of such network should be somehow anchored at European level, at the European Union level. Funding, to some extent, and pricing. Funding will be more difficult, well, to admit a political solution in which funding would be provided or guaranteed by any central body. But at least in terms of pricing, I think that the pooling of financial resources in these entities, national asset management companies connected in a European network, would require for standardized valuation methodologies and data to determine the price at which NPLs are transferred from banks to the asset managers. So I think there is room to progress here, and it would be a very important point indeed for tackling NPLs in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Maybe, well, we are receiving questions regarding the regulation playing field. And one of the questions is that, well, with fintech companies and lending platforms growing and gaining ground, Do you believe it's time for a sort of reset in banking and fintech regulation, providing a new level playing field, but without affecting innovation? And which aspects of this fintech space should regulators monitor more closely? And do you believe that these new entrants might accelerate economic recovery? Maybe I would begin with Dr. Mário Centeno.
Thank you again for the question. A key concern from a financial stability point of view is the pro-cyclical behavior of financial intermediaries, including those non-bank entities. I remember last March, where in particular investment funds sold large amount of securities. Specific market segments, such as money market funds, experienced significant stress during that month. Main drivers of the selling had been a growing liquidity mismatch between assets and liabilities, as well as high leverage built up in some member states before the crisis. This was not, fortunately, the case of Portugal. In fact, the SRB has published very recently a report on these issues, which considers a range of systemic risks and vulnerabilities related to non-bank financial intermediation, including from interconnectedness, liquidity, and leverage. One line of defense could be enhancing the macroprudential framework for non-banks. An enhanced macroprudential framework could significantly contribute to increasing the resilience of the sector from an ex-ante perspective. It would also limit spillover risks to banks and help to ensure the non-banks provide a stable source of funding. It could also reduce the need for extraordinary monetary policy interventions in the future. Let me be very clear, there are risks, of course. We should be careful and be aware that any changes in the existing framework can produce unintended effects, either within the non-bank sector or by contagion to banks, given the existing interconnectedness between them. In addition, the timing of implementation and the phasing of requirements should also be carefully considered to avoid any unintended procyclical effect. Let me just give you an example. If the buildup of liquidity buffers is too fast or is adopted simultaneously across the financial sector, it can enhance liquidity shortages. And we must be, of course, be careful with that. But I will say, to sum up, that we need to integrate these different subsegments of intermediary, financial intermediaries in our everyday life, but with a very cautious approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mário Centeno. Dr. Vítor Constâncio, after 8 years as Vice President of the ECB, could I have your comments on this question?
Of the procyclicality of the financial system?
Basically, how to balance, is there a need for a reset of the level of the playing field for regulators, given this fintech space, fintech companies development? And how do you see it as important for regulators to monitor more closely or to take profit from its intervention for accelerate recovery?
Yeah. Well, first let me say that with the exception of payments, where fintechs dominate now the scene and the banks have lost a big part of their revenues linked with the payments, a part of that, the presence of fintech companies in financing advanced economies is still very, very small. So we must, in the first place, be aware of the dimensions, which of course are bound to increase, especially in what regards credit distribution. I think that the main guidance for regulators and supervisors regarding the development of fintech entities has to do with the access to deposits by those fintechs, meaning the regular collection of funds from the public, promising 100% nominal payback if the clients want to withdraw their funds. Because if these fintechs could be allowed to have access to a collection of funds that would be akin to deposits, then they should be regulated as banks. The main reason why financial and banking regulation started to happen at the beginning of the 20th century had to do with the protection of depositors, which was crucial, of course, for the subsistence of institutions that ensure the financing in our economies and do a task which only banks can really do, which is maturity transformation, having short-term liabilities and granted credits with much longer maturities. That's why they are supervised since the beginning of the 20th century in a big way in order to allow that transformation, but at the same time protect depositors. And so the protection of depositors is the main reason for banking regulation. And the banks are heavily regulated because of that. So if now new financial institutions come and start to collect funds on a regular basis, the same way that the banks do, then they must be regulated as banks. And that's, in my view, the more important regulation principle in dealing with fintech. And I hope that these will be respected this way, because we cannot have the destruction of the role of banks in our financial system and take that as, you know, a not important thing. Banks have this crucial task of ensuring maturity transformation that no other institution can do the same way. And so then, of course, there is all the regulation about know your client and everything that has to do with the conduct of financial institutions. But the more important principle is the one I stressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Luís Moraes?
If I may step in,
A quick comment.
Yes, I understand that we are in the limit of our time. So just two short notes to be quick. I would very much agree with Dr. Vítor Constâncio on his point. I think that the key point here is that if fintechs at some point have access to deposits, then we have a level playing field problem, which has to be tackled by the regulators. But I would also call the attention of the regulators to the way they should monitor the nowadays trends towards increased digital banking. And I think that we could, very briefly, we could foresee three major trends in terms of digitalization in banking. First, the establishment by traditional banks of internal in-house specialized units in the digital area, including branches, which are particularly dedicated to digital technologies. Second, the development of new digital business models through joint ventures between banks and fintechs and technological companies, which raise interesting problems from the point of view of financial regulation and also competition law. And third, the development of specialized fora for cooperation between banks, fintechs, and technological companies. Again, this type of forums will imply interesting problems in terms of financial regulation and competition law. But I'm aware that we are in the limit of our time.
Yes, thank you, Luís. It's true. We would be hours discussing this. I would put just a final question. If the organization allows me, maybe beginning with the Secretary of State. We all know that if there is a key issue that, well, will come out of this pandemic, definitely with more debt levels. The debt levels, the debt burden will increase. And so after a few years where non-financial corporations have evolved in a positive way, we'll have to manage this problem. And so one of the issues, and definitely in Portugal, we have a question about it. In Portugal, if there is a problem, is that we have a level of debt that is too high in companies, in non-financial corporations. So what do you believe, Dr. João Nuno Mendes, should the EU as a whole, but Portugal specifically, what should be done and can be done as quickly as possible to reduce the burden of debt as a whole, and specifically for NFCs, and re-equitize the economy, increase capital levels in companies as a whole? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. I think that that's a concern now in the European Union, how we are going to deal with the solvency issues, not specifically in Portugal, but across the European Union. And, you know, the data shows that this crisis is putting under pressure certain specific sectors. Because if you take a look, for example, to the exports figures, you see that we are seeing some resilience elements of the industrial sector, not only in Portugal, but across the European Union. So we feel that we need to prepare ourselves for the post-pandemic world, where, of course, solvency will be an issue. We need to take a look to the sectors that are going to be most affected, to the companies that were, you know, viable companies before the crisis, that still have a business plan, that really can still win their future. And we have a lot of data about that, because one of the instruments that we used in order to establish the public guarantees was what we call in Portugal the Fundo de Contra-Garantia Mútua, and mutual guarantee companies. And so that's a system that works for many years, that knows the companies for many years, that relies on its own rating system, that relies, you know, on the rating systems of the banks. Because when you provide a public guarantee, there needs to be a coherence between, you know, a bank that is giving a credit and the support by the state through a mechanism that needs to fulfill certain criteria related to the rating. So I think that comes to the point that was already presented by the government, that we'll have a plan to deal with the end of the moratoria, which will have a toll on the solvency of specific sectors. And of course, the state aid provisions in the European Union need to adapt to this development of the crisis, because what we are feeling now in the European Union, it's not a division between North and South. Everyone knows that this crisis took a toll in every country. The point is that these sectors, which are more exposed to services and tourism, are more important in some specific countries than others. But everyone is being hit. That's why we also have this very big consensus across Europe. For example, Austria is one of the countries, usually it's a country which is presented as a country that's not part, you know, of the South Club, but they have, you know, a tourism sector which is very close to the size of the tourism sector in Portugal or Spain or in Italy. So I would say that there's a consensus because of the way that the sectors are being hit. So we cannot, when we talk about this challenge of the solvency, of the leveraging, we must not forget that our sectors especially eat, and we cannot forget that we must focus on those companies that have, you know, winning business models for the future, and that were not under difficulties, you know, before the crisis emerged. So these are some principles. Of course, we need to get the best reading of the situation as it happens, and for that we need data. And it's very important, the work that now the banks must be doing about preparing themselves debtor by debtor, credit by credit, for the post-moratoria. So I think that there is some element of credit analysis that should be permanent and ongoing for us not to deal with a surprise in the day after. So this work, and now we have more powerful instruments in the way we manage the credit systems that we do not have in the past. We have much more data, and we have ratings also. So we look forward for that work. We are keeping in contact, of course, with the Bank of Portugal and with some Portuguese banks about it.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Well, I will welcome a final comment from each one of the speakers regarding this issue. Anyway, we are already using 8 minutes from the second panel. So if any one of you wants to make a final comment on this.